It's been years now, but I still remember the night like it happened yesterday. They told me I should let it go, but, well, I just can't. This is hard to explain, but I think it's time to finally tell the story. My name's Ellie. Well, it's Eleanor now, but back then it was just Ellie. My twin sister, Sarah, and I were out there Thanksgiving weekend in '93, just south of where the Cascades start to slope down. We'd been hiking, just taking in the crisp air, and then we found it. Bigfoot, well, I didn't know it was Bigfoot yet, not really. At the time, it was just a large, trembling figure in the brush, hurt, bleeding. We dragged it back to the barn, kept it hidden. We thought we were doing the right thing. We were just kids, but we kept it safe for 30 years, until someone found out. I still hear the knocks. Same as that first night. Late September 1993, rural Oregon, near the Cascades. The air smelled like pine needles and wet earth, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes for days. Sarah and I were 16 then, living on our family's old property with Mom. Dad had died 2 years earlier, heart attack, in the middle of harvest season. The barn at the edge of the property had been his workshop, but after he passed, nobody went in there much. It just sat there, weathered and gray, full of old tools and memories we weren't ready to face. That Thanksgiving weekend, we decided to hike up the ridge behind our place. It wasn't anything special, just a tradition we'd started the year before. The trail was narrow, overgrown in places, and the weather had turned cold enough that our breath came out in little clouds. Sarah walked ahead of me, her boots crunching on the frost-covered leaves. We didn't talk much. We never did on those hikes. It was just about being out there, away from everything. Around noon, we heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Deep, guttural, almost human, but not quite. Sarah stopped walking and turned to look at me, her eyes wide. We both stood there, frozen, listening. The sound came again, weaker this time, followed by heavy, labored breathing. It was coming from somewhere off the trail, deeper in the brush. I told Sarah we should turn back, but she was already moving toward the sound. That was Sarah, always the brave one, always the first to run toward trouble instead of away from it. I followed because I wasn't about to let her go alone. We pushed through the thick underbrush, thorns catching on our jackets, until we saw it. At first, I thought it was just some injured animal. A bear, maybe? Or an elk. But as we got closer, I could see it wasn't either of those things. It was massive, covered in dark matted fur, and it was bleeding from a deep wound on its shoulder. The creature was slumped against a fallen log, its breathing ragged and shallow. When it turned its head to look at us, I saw its eyes, dark, intelligent, afraid. I told Sarah it was just some injured animal, but even then, we both knew it wasn't. We spent the rest of that afternoon figuring out what to do. We couldn't just leave it there to die, but we also couldn't exactly call for help. Who would we even call? And what would we say? We found a giant bleeding creature in the woods? They'd think we were crazy, so we made a decision that would change everything. We would bring it back to the barn. Getting it there was harder than I can explain. The creature was semi-conscious, barely able to move, but it was heavy, heavier than anything we'd ever tried to lift. We found an old tarp in the woods, probably left by hunters, and used it to drag the creature down the hillside. It took us hours. By the time we got back to our property, the sun was setting, and our arms felt like they were going to fall off. The barn smelled like old hay and motor oil. Dust particles floated in the shafts of light coming through the cracks in the walls. We cleared a space in the back corner, behind some old equipment, and laid the creature down on a bed of hay. It was still breathing, but barely. Sarah ran to the house to get supplies, bandages, water, whatever we could find. Mom was in town visiting her sister, so we had the place to ourselves for a few more hours. We spent that night cleaning the wound as best we could. The creature never made a sound, just watched us with those dark eyes. I kept thinking it would attack us or get up and leave, but it just lay there, letting us help. The wound on its shoulder looked like it had been caused by something sharp, maybe a hunter's arrow or a branch. We wrapped it in strips of torn bedding and hoped for the best. That was the first night we heard the knocks, 3 of them, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere outside the barn. Sarah and I looked at each other, both of us too scared to move. The knocks came again, same rhythm, same spacing. We waited in silence, listening to the creature's breathing mix with the sound of our own heartbeats. Eventually, the knocking stopped, and we went back to the house. It wasn't like we were trying to hide it on purpose. I guess we just didn't know who'd believe us. The next morning, Mom came home and asked what we'd been up to. We told her we'd gone hiking, which was true, and that we'd cleaned out part of the barn, which was also true in a way. She seemed pleased that we were finally doing something with Dad's old space. She never went in there herself. Too many memories, she said. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a routine. Every morning before school and every evening after, we'd go to the barn to check on the creature. We brought it water in an old metal bucket and food, mostly fruit and vegetables from our garden, though we had no idea if that's what it ate. The creature never rejected anything we offered. It just watched us with those intelligent, knowing eyes. The wound started to heal, slowly but surely. By Christmas, the creature was able to sit up on its own. By spring, it could stand. We never spoke about what we were doing, not even to each other. It was like we had this unspoken agreement that as long as we didn't say it out loud, it wasn't real. But it was real, and it was getting stronger. That spring, strange things started happening. We'd find things rearranged in the barn, tools moved, hay bales stacked in odd patterns, and the knocking continued. Always at night, always 3 knocks in the same rhythm. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and hear it, clear as day, even though our house was a good 100 yards from the barn. Sarah started researching. She'd go to the library after school and check out books about wildlife, about unexplained phenomena, about, though she never said it out loud, Bigfoot. She'd bring the books home and read them in her room, making notes in the margins. I pretended not to notice, but I knew what she was thinking. We both knew what we had in that barn, even if neither of us was ready to admit it. By the summer of 1995, the creature had fully recovered. It no longer needed us to bring it food or water. We'd find evidence that it had been leaving the barn at night. Large, deep footprints in the soft earth around our property, broken branches at heights no bear could reach. But it always came back, and it never hurt us. Sometimes I'd hear the knocks at night, just like the first night. 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. It wasn't like anything else we'd ever heard. The years passed. Sarah and I graduated high school, then college. We both stayed close to home, neither of us willing to move too far from the barn. Mom never suspected anything. The creature, and by now, I knew what it was, even if I couldn't bring myself to say the word, became part of our lives in a way that felt both normal and completely surreal. In the fall of 2001, everything started to change. A man named Robert Henshaw moved into the property next to ours. He was from Portland, one of those city people who decided they wanted to get back to nature or whatever. He was friendly enough, always waving when he drove past, always asking if we needed help with anything. But there was something about the way he looked at our property that made me nervous. One evening in late October, Robert showed up at our door, asking if he could store some equipment in our barn. His own shed was full, he said, and he just needed a place to keep a few things until spring. Sarah and I exchanged a look. Our barn? No way. But we couldn't explain why without raising suspicion, so Sarah told him we were actually using the barn for our own storage, and there wasn't any room. He didn't push it, just smiled and said he understood. But after that, I noticed him walking his property line more often, always looking toward our barn. One night, I saw his flashlight beam sweeping across the barn's exterior. I watched from my bedroom window, my heart pounding, until he finally went back to his house. The creature seemed to sense the change, too. The knocking became more frequent, more insistent. Sometimes I'd wake up to find Sarah already awake, staring out her window toward the barn. We didn't talk about it, but we both felt it. Our secret was pressing against the walls we'd built around it, threatening to break free. In November, Robert mentioned to Sarah that he'd been hearing strange sounds at night, deep, whooping calls that he couldn't identify. Had we heard them? Sarah told him it was probably just coyotes or owls. He nodded, but I could see he didn't believe her. His curiosity was growing, and with it, our fear. I thought maybe he heard something, but when I asked, he just said it was wind. But it wasn't wind. Spring came, and with it, a growing sense of dread. The creature's presence, once comforting in its familiarity, now felt like a weight around our necks. Every time Robert drove past, every time he stopped to chat, I felt like our secret was about to spill out into the open. The knocking grew louder, not just at night anymore, but sometimes in broad daylight. 3 knocks, always the same pattern, but now they sounded urgent, almost angry. Sarah and I started taking turns sleeping, one of us always awake, to make sure Robert didn't get too curious. The lack of sleep was making us paranoid. We jumped at every sound, saw threats in every shadow. One afternoon in May, I was in the barn refilling the water bucket when I heard it behind me. A low, rumbling sound, like a growl but deeper. I turned slowly, and there it was, standing at its full height. I'd seen the creature stand before, but never like this. Never so close. Never so aware. It looked at me, and I felt something pass between us. Understanding, recognition, I don't know. But in that moment, I knew that it knew. It knew we were afraid. It knew our secret was in danger. And it was afraid too. The sound in the barn was unmistakable. Heavy breathing, shifting weight. I could smell it too. That distinct odor of wet fur and earth that clung to the creature. It had become so familiar that I barely noticed it anymore. But that day it seemed overpowering, filling my lungs with every breath. I whispered, "I'm sorry." I don't know why. Maybe because I felt like we'd failed it somehow. We'd kept it hidden, kept it safe. But now that safety was crumbling. The creature didn't respond, just watched me with those dark eyes before turning and moving back into the shadows of the barn. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the night, waiting for the 3 knocks that I knew would come. When they did, they were so loud they rattled my window. Sarah came into my room without saying a word and sat on the edge of my bed. We sat there in silence, listening. The knocking didn't stop. It never stopped. 3 knocks, louder each time. I swear I could feel it, its breath on the back of my neck. The summer of 2008 was the hottest I could remember. The grass turned brown. The creek behind our property dried to a trickle, and the air hung thick and still. Mom had passed away that spring, and Sarah and I were left to manage the property on our own. We were in our 30s now, both unmarried, both still living in our childhood home, both still keeping the same secret we'd kept for 15 years. It was in July, just after sunset, when I saw it clearly for the first time. I'd seen glimpses before, a shadow moving in the barn, a shape in the darkness, but never the full picture. I was walking back from checking the irrigation system when I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing in the barn doorway, backlit by the fading light, was the creature, not crouched or hidden, but standing tall, easily 8 feet, maybe more. Its shoulders were broad, its arms long and powerful. The fur covering its body was dark brown, almost black in places, and matted from years of living in confinement. But it was the face that struck me, so human, yet so clearly not. The eyes, deep-set and intelligent, watched me without fear. We stood there, both of us frozen for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it raised one massive hand in what looked almost like a gesture of acknowledgement. Or maybe a warning, I couldn't tell. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'd been telling myself for years that we were protecting some unknown species of animal. But seeing it then, standing like that, I couldn't deny it anymore. It wasn't a bear or some wild animal. It stood there like a person, but it wasn't. It was something else. It was Bigfoot. The word finally crystallized in my mind, undeniable and terrifying. The creature lowered its hand and stepped back into the shadows of the barn. I stood there for another minute, trying to process what I'd just seen, what I'd finally admitted to myself. Then I turned and walked back to the house, my legs shaking. Sarah was in the kitchen when I came in. She took one look at my face and knew. "You saw it," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She poured us both a drink, and we sat at the kitchen table in silence, the weight of 15 years settling over us like dust. Robert Henshaw didn't give up. If anything, his curiosity seemed to intensify over the years. By the fall of 2010, he'd started bringing equipment onto his property, trail cameras, motion sensors, audio recording devices. He told Sarah he was trying to document the local wildlife for a nature photography project. But I knew better. He was looking for something specific. One Saturday in October, I was in the garden when I saw him walking along our property line, a camera in his hand. He waved when he saw me, then called out, asking if I minded if he took some photos of the old barn. For his project, he said. It had such great character. I should have said no. I should have told him to stay on his own property. But I was tired of lying, tired of hiding, tired of the constant fear. So I said yes, as long as he stayed outside. He thanked me and walked toward the barn, his camera already raised. I followed at a distance, my stomach churning. Robert circled the barn, taking photos from different angles. He seemed particularly interested in the large doors at the back, the ones we never used anymore. He was standing there, adjusting his lens, when the creature must have sensed his presence. I heard it before I saw it, that low, rumbling growl that I'd only heard a few times before. Robert heard it too. He lowered his camera and looked around confused. "What was that?" he asked. Then the barn door creaked open just a few inches. Through the gap, I could see movement in the darkness, large, shifting shadows. Robert took a step closer, raising his camera again. "Hello?" he called out. That's when the creature appeared. Not fully, just enough, a massive hand gripping the edge of the door, dark fur visible in the afternoon light, and the smell, that unmistakable smell of wet fur and wild earth, suddenly strong and overwhelming. Robert stumbled backward, his camera falling from his hands. His face went white. He looked at me, then back at the barn, then at me again. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. The creature let out another growl, louder this time, and Robert turned and ran. He ran across our property, through his yard, and straight into his house. I stood there, watching him go, knowing that everything had just changed. I shouldn't have let him in. I knew I should have stopped him, but I didn't. The next few years were a blur of anxiety and preparation. Robert never came back to our property, but I knew he hadn't forgotten what he'd seen. I could see him sometimes, standing in his yard, staring at our barn. Sarah and I talked about our options. We could try to move the creature, but where would we take it? The forests around here were full of hikers and hunters. We could try to relocate ourselves, but the thought of leaving our home, Dad's land, felt impossible. By 2014, we'd resigned ourselves to waiting. Whatever was going to happen would happen. We couldn't control it anymore. The creature seemed to sense our resignation. The knocking became less frequent, almost gentle. Sometimes I'd find small gifts left on the barn's threshold, carefully arranged stones, woven grasses, once a handful of bright red berries laid out in a perfect circle. Then, in early December, Robert finally made his move. He came to our door with a sheriff's deputy. The deputy was young, probably fresh out of training, and he looked uncomfortable. Robert did most of the talking. He told us he'd been hearing strange sounds for years. He'd captured some audio recordings that he wanted the sheriff to hear. He believed there was something dangerous on our property. Sarah invited them in, calm as anything. She offered them coffee, asked about their families. The deputy relaxed a little. Robert played his recordings, deep whooping calls, the sound of heavy footsteps, that three-knock pattern that had become so familiar to us. The deputy listened, then shrugged. "Could be anything," he said. "Bears, maybe. Elk. Sound carries funny out here." But Robert wasn't satisfied. He insisted on checking the property, especially the barn. The deputy looked at us, and I saw Sarah nod. What choice did we have? If we refused, we'd look guilty of something worse than harboring a Bigfoot. We walked them to the barn, my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept thinking about what the creature might do if it felt threatened. Would it attack? Would it try to hide? As we approached, I could feel its presence, heavy and watching somewhere in the shadows. The deputy opened the barn doors. Light flooded in, illuminating the old tools, the hay, the empty corners. He looked around, walking through the space slowly. Robert followed, his eyes scanning every surface. But they found nothing. The creature had vanished. It was no longer about hiding. It was about what we'd lost, what we were willing to risk. Spring brought new problems. Robert had gone quiet after that day in the barn, but I didn't trust it. The silence felt like the calm before a storm. Sarah and I increased our vigilance, taking turns watching the barn, making sure the creature stayed hidden during daylight hours. But we both knew we couldn't keep this up forever. In April, things came to a head. The sheriff's office received an anonymous tip, probably from Robert, though we could never prove it, about suspicious activity on our property. This time, they sent a different deputy, an older man named Carson, who'd been with the department for 20 years. He showed up on a Tuesday morning with a search warrant. Carson was thorough. He searched the house first, then moved to the outbuildings. Sarah and I watched from the porch, holding our breath. When he reached the barn, I felt my stomach drop. But just like before, he found nothing. The creature had either hidden itself so completely that even a thorough search couldn't reveal it, or it had left the property entirely. After Carson left, Sarah and I went to the barn. We called out softly, the way we'd always done when we wanted the creature to know it was safe. Nothing. We searched every corner, every shadow. The barn was empty except for the usual clutter of farm equipment and old hay. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, wondering if we'd lost it forever. Had the searches scared it away? Had it finally decided that staying with us was too dangerous? I felt an unexpected grief at the thought, a loss that seemed disproportionate to what should have been a relief. Then, around 3 a.m, I heard it. The 3 knocks, soft but unmistakable. I went to my window and looked out toward the barn. In the moonlight, I could see a figure standing just inside the doorway, large, unmistakable, watching the house, watching us. The creature, Bigfoot, I had to call it what it was, hadn't left. It had just learned to be more careful. Over the next few weeks, I realized it was no longer staying in the barn during the day. It would leave before dawn and return after dark, using the forest around our property as cover. It had adapted, just like we had, finding new ways to survive in a world that was closing in. I never thought I'd have to say it, but here I was, standing in front of it. Bigfoot, just standing there like a real person. The summer of 2015 was when everything finally fell apart. Robert had gotten more sophisticated in his surveillance. He'd mounted cameras all around his property, some pointing toward our land. He'd joined online forums dedicated to Bigfoot sightings, posting about the unusual activity in our area. People started showing up: amateur researchers, curiosity seekers, weekend warriors with expensive equipment and wild theories. Our quiet corner of Oregon was becoming a circus. Sarah and I watched cars slowly drive past our property, saw people walking the edges of our land with cameras and audio recorders. The sheriff's department started patrolling more frequently, probably tired of the calls they were getting. One night in July, a group of 3 men set up camp in the forest just beyond our property line. We could see their lights flickering through the trees. Around midnight, they started making calls, loud whooping sounds that echoed through the valley. They were trying to attract Bigfoot. What they got instead was the real thing. I was on the porch when I heard the response, a deep, resonating call that made my chest vibrate. It wasn't defensive or aggressive. It sounded almost sad, like a plea for peace. But the men in the forest heard it, and within minutes, they were crashing through the underbrush, following the sound. I ran into the house and got Sarah. We grabbed flashlights and headed toward the commotion. By the time we got there, the men had stopped at the edge of a small clearing. Their lights were all pointed at something I couldn't see from where I stood. Then one of them raised his camera, and I heard the rapid click of a shutter. "Oh my God," one of them whispered. "It's real. Bigfoot is real." Sarah pushed through the brush ahead of me. When I caught up to her, I saw what they were photographing. The creature was there, in full view, standing in the moonlight. It wasn't hiding or running. It was just standing there, looking at these strangers with what I can only describe as resignation. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the creature turned and walked into the forest, its movements surprisingly quiet for something so large. The men tried to follow, but Sarah stepped in front of them. "Private property," she said firmly. "You need to leave." They argued for a minute, then reluctantly packed up their equipment. But I knew the damage was done. They had photographs, they had audio. Our secret wasn't ours anymore. Maybe it wasn't meant to be shared with the world. It was just ours to carry. We didn't wait for the news to spread. Sarah and I knew. What would happen once those photos hit the internet? Within days, our property would be swarmed. The creature, Bigfoot, would be hunted, captured, or worse. We couldn't let that happen. That night, we made a decision. We packed what we could fit in Sarah's truck and left. Not forever, but long enough to figure out what to do next. We stayed with our aunt in Idaho for a few weeks, watching from a distance as the story exploded online. The photos were grainy, taken in low light, but they were clear enough. Forums lit up with debate. Some people claimed they were fake. Others insisted they were proof. News vans showed up at our property. The sheriff's department had to post deputies to keep trespassers away. Robert gave interviews to anyone who would listen, talking about the years of strange sounds and mysterious sightings. But without us there, without the creature, there was nothing for them to find. The excitement eventually died down. The news vans left. The forums moved on to other sightings in other places. Our property became just another location in the endless catalog of alleged Bigfoot encounters. We came back in September, driving up the long gravel road in the early morning. The house looked the same, just emptier somehow. The barn stood silent against the gray sky. We spent that first day cleaning up the mess left by trespassers, cigarette butts, empty beer cans, trampled flower beds. That night, I heard the 3 knocks, soft, tentative, like a question. I went to the window and saw the creature standing at the edge of the tree line. It didn't come closer, just stood there watching the house. I raised my hand in a small wave. It raised its hand too, mirroring my gesture. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness. Over the next few months, the pattern repeated. The creature would appear at night, always keeping its distance, always watching. Sometimes I'd find gifts again, stones, feathers, once a perfect bird's nest. But it never came back to the barn. That chapter had closed. Sarah and I fell into a new routine. We didn't talk about what had happened. We just lived our lives, tending to the property, keeping to ourselves. Robert moved away in early 2017. Too much attention, he said. Too many crazy people showing up at his door. It wasn't just some story. It was a life we kept hidden. The years since have been quiet. Sarah eventually moved to Washington, got married, started a life that doesn't revolve around secrets and shadows. We still talk every week, but we never mention Bigfoot. It's like an unspoken agreement between us. That part of our lives is over, locked away with all the other things we don't discuss. But I still hear those knocks sometimes, when the wind picks up. 3 knocks, faint and far away, but unmistakable. I know I should let it go, but I can't. It was a part of me now. The weight of what we protected, what we lost, what we chose to keep hidden. It shaped everything that came after. Sometimes I think about those men with their cameras, about Robert with his recordings, about all the people who came looking for proof. They wanted to find Bigfoot, to prove it existed, to capture it somehow. But they didn't understand. Bigfoot wasn't a discovery waiting to be made. It was a being that deserved peace, privacy, protection. We gave it that for as long as we could. I never deleted the photos I took over the years. They're on an old phone in my desk drawer, hundreds of them, blurry images of shadows and shapes, nothing clear enough to prove anything. I look at them sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. They remind me that it was real, all of it. The house feels different now, emptier. Mom's been gone for over 15 years. Sarah's 3 states away. The barn sits unused, slowly weathering under Oregon's rain and wind. Sometimes I think about selling the property, moving somewhere new, starting fresh. But I never do. This is where it happened. This is where we made our choice. Last week I heard the knocks again. 3 of them, slow and deliberate, at 3 in the morning. I got out of bed and went to the window. The moon was full, casting silver light across the property. At the edge of the tree line, I saw a shape. Large, familiar, watching. I don't know if it's the same creature from all those years ago. It could be. Or maybe it's something else, someone else. Maybe there are others out there, living in the spaces between our knowledge and our fear. I don't go looking for answers anymore. Some things are better left as questions. The knocks don't stop. Not really. I just pretend I don't hear them anymore. Maybe that's the secret we were meant to keep. Not the existence of Bigfoot, but the understanding that some things don't need to be shared, proven, or explained. Some things can just exist, quietly, in the spaces we create for them. I still live in the same house. Still wake up some nights to the sound of 3 knocks. Still find stones arranged in patterns on the porch rail. And I'm okay with that. We protected something rare, something important. Even if nobody else knows it, even if the photos on that old phone will never be seen, Sarah and I know what we did. The world keeps looking for Bigfoot, keeps searching for proof. They won't find it here. That's my final gift to the creature that changed our lives. Silence, secrecy, protection. Maybe one day I'll tell this story for real. Use my own name instead of anonymity. But not yet. For now, the secret lives on, carried in the sound of 3 knocks and the weight of memory.